Good evening, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Futurati Podcast, where we dive into how emerging technologies will impact the world and your bank account. I'm Trent Fowler, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Thomas Fry. Thomas and I are futurists, keynote speakers, and consultants with decades of experience in analyzing trends and communicating new developments to audiences across the world. Reach out to us at futuratipodcast.com/contact-futurati if you'd like to hire us for consulting, to speak at your event, or to advertise on our podcast. Thomas, we just wrapped up a fascinating interview with Taylor Black, who I think has maybe the coolest job in the entire world. Do you want to summarize a little bit and kick us off here?
Yeah, he says he works with startup companies from stage 0 to stage 1. This is the really messy front end of a startup. This is the point where you take all these loose pieces and crazy ideas and try to pull them together and try to make sense out of them. And it seems like he has become an expert at doing that. And you're right. I think this is actually the coolest job in the world, but it's not designed for everybody. That's for sure.
No, that's true. It's really hardcore. You have to have a really high octane mind, and he obviously does. But basically, the idea is they have in-house teams of experts, like scientists or artists or engineers, former founders, and they just come up with awesome ideas for meta materials that can do really interesting things with different kinds of signals. He talks about golf ball manufacturing, a couple of other things like that. So it's just he casts this huge net, deep tech all over the place, right? And they ideate internally and then wrap companies around that, spin them off, and then get a little equity. So it's like I guess between angel investing and proper venture capital, maybe, but it's in this like messy part where the ideas are just getting off the ground. That I didn't even know people did that exactly.
Yeah, so he talks about the minimum viable product, but then he wants somehow to prove out what they have there, and that's always involves getting customers involved,
Right.
And that's the critical part. Once you can involve customers at a really early stage of the game, then you have all this data that you can start working on, that they like this, they don't like that, and this didn't make sense over here. And so, yeah, I think he's really perfected this into a real interesting system that he uses.
Yeah, I agree. It was really, really cool. He's very insightful. He thinks a lot about, how the process works, how people discover new things, how that knowledge gets productized. And I just thought his whole approach was very fascinating, and hopefully you will find it fascinating as well. So without further ado, this is our interview with Taylor Black. Tonight, we're joined by Taylor Black. Taylor is a cross-functional team leader and seasoned entrepreneur passionate about driving innovation and growth. As a co-founder of Fizzy Ventures and a principal program manager at Microsoft Incubation Studio, Taylor has been at the forefront of entrepreneurial ecosystems, venture studios, and technology and business model innovation. Thanks to this remarkable background, Taylor's expertise is sought after by founders, corporate innovators, venture accelerators, incubators, and studios alike. If you enjoy this interview, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. And don't forget to check out our website, futuratipodcast.com. Taylor, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Good to be here.
Let's hear a little bit about your background, your interests, and what brought you to working on the problems you're working on today.
Yeah, sure. So I've kind of been in the startup space for a long time. Did the proverbial lemonade stand, ran a company when I was an undergrad, started a tech company while I was in law school, ended up doing that instead of becoming an attorney. And since selling my company in 2014, I've been involved in the venture builder space, which is really kind of venture capital applied to building companies at very early stages from kind of the 0 to 1. I've done that at Intellectual Ventures. I'm currently doing that inside of Microsoft in the CTO's office. And I've also helped a number of different venture studios along the way. I love it when I can help entrepreneurs do what they do faster and better by taking away the obstacles that aren't key to the core of their business so that they can just run with their idea.
So you're like a force multiplier.
You focus on the messy front end then. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's the messy front end. It's all the operational stuff. It's all the, oh, my attorney told me X, Y, Z. It's like, no, let's smooth out the running path these entrepreneurs have. They're solving a problem that they understand their customer has. They have a solution that they really want to bring to market. Let's take all the extraneous stuff like formation, like ops, like HR, like finance out of that equation so that they're able to get to product market fit as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's that most people hate. So I'm glad we have people like you that love that area.
It's a good way to stay in business.
Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding. So I have a couple of follow-up questions. I'd like to get a little bit clearer on the actual kinds of companies you've built. We were talking about this a little bit before, so we can put some kind of meat on those bones and understand that a little bit better. And then I'm also sort of curious about, what the day-to-day of your work is like. So it sounds like you just, you look at the plate, you take a bunch of stuff off of it, right? And it's like you're not even you're building the company, you're not building the product. But I'm kind of curious as to how into the tech you get and all that sort of stuff. So just feel free to riff on that.
Yeah, certainly. My first like real company, aside from, the artwork business I had when I was in high school, was a company that bought up a bunch of properties around my undergraduate institution, and then turned each of them into an LLC and allowed people to buy into the LLC and become fractional property owners rather than renters, which dropped my property management costs a whole lot because people could sell out at a higher rate than they actually bought in. Similar to a company called Picasso, except I was working in college real estate rather than high-end vacation homes. In second thought, I should have started with the high-end vacation homes, but neither here nor there. After that, I started a web design and development agency. I taught myself to program in high school and kind of used that to pay the bills through undergrad. And did a bunch of different design and development work for Fortune 500 companies, for mom and pop shops, for universities. As the agency grew and I was going to grad school, we realized that we had a certain specialty around a niche of learning management systems. Then this is back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And so we developed a B2B SaaS product that allowed individuals, universities, anybody who wanted to deliver content online and own their platform and not have to charge, pay a platform fee, to stand up their own learning management system. Ran that for a couple of years while I was in law school, graduated law school, decided that the tech route was a lot more fun and a lot more lucrative. And ended up selling that B2B SaaS LMS company in 2014. After that, I went into business intelligence for about a year and a half, taking a lot of the data side that I had learned in building the B2B SaaS company, but also really started getting into venture studios at that point in time. Venture studios, for those who may not know, are kind of venture firms that spend a lot of hands-on time helping the entrepreneur de-risk the idea, rapidly prototype to something that starts to find some customer traction, and then build it to a minimum viable product that they're then able to launch as a kind of Series A sort of startup. Because of my background in biochemistry and in construction in a variety of different areas, I've been kind of sector agnostic for almost all of my career. I started in kind of deep tech, working with the Invention Science Fund, which is one of the funds of Intellectual Ventures. We spun out companies in nuclear technology and metamaterials and biomedical devices and deep physics applications that I don't quite even understand, superconductivity, and things like golf balls and things that are more mundane as well.
Yeah.
And then we spun a lot of companies out there. A number of them are still doing very well and growing and launching satellites and building reactors in Wyoming and that sort of thing.
So how do you get paid for the service you provide?
Yeah. Talk to us about the business side. I was going to ask that same question.
Certainly, yeah. So venture studios generally take a fairly large chunk of the cap table early on, knowing that they're going to be diluted quite a bit, and two, generally they co-create the intellectual property with the founders themselves within the studio, and then portion of the studio team, along with some outside folks that they've hired in, take that nascent idea and project once it's fleshed out within the studio, and that becomes the company and the founder, and the venture studio takes, between 15 to sometimes even 30, depending on the kind of technology, percent of the cap table.
Okay, then it gets fairly diluted. And so you're black swan farming in Paul Graham's phrase. Does it work out that way? Like a lot of them end up fizzling out, but there are a couple Facebooks in there and that sort of pays for everything.
It does, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a similar model to all of VC. The idea is that you're further up the value chain so that you're able to work through thousands of ideas, or really tens of thousands of ideas, before you get to prototype, rather than focusing on the 5 to 10 to 100 startups that most VCs might invest in a particular year.
So you're calling it a lot earlier, right? When you're deciding, when startups are coming through that filter. Earlier, you said you're trying to find 0 to 1 companies. So how do you do that? We've talked to a couple of venture capitalists, on this show, and they've talked to us a little bit about how they form a thesis and what that process is like. So what's it like for you? How do you decide which ones to bet on?
Yeah, but for us, it's very much, we're all builders. Yeah, there aren't very many people who are just finance focused in general venture capital firms. All of us have been founders. All of us have built companies from the ground up. And so we know a lot of the mistakes that you can make and how to avoid them. And so what we're really just trying to prove out in the end is that product market fit. We don't have to worry about, founder and co-founder relations, because that's something we've solved in a previous life. We don't have to worry about, we didn't file that form at the right time. We got hosed because we had this kind of investor come in. There's just a whole set of questions that are common to the startup, like starting a venture sort of space, that are solved questions, and we're able to focus on the technology proving out and finding that product market fit without all of that extraneous barriers to entry in that space. Additionally, too, it allows us a whole lot of access to really high quality capital, because it's coming from a firm of people who have done this before. As a result, our Series A, our Series B companies have an easier time raising, because they're coming out of a place that's kind of given their stamp of approval on the way in which things were set up and how much this company has been de-risked as a result.
So how booked up are you at the moment?
Booked up?
Yeah. I mean, if we showed up on your doorstep with 3 business plans, is that too much for you?
No. So the interesting thing is, most venture studios don't accept applications.
Oh.
We come up with our own ideas. Yep.
Okay.
We co-create with other teams, but it's important that we start with ownership of the IP rather than firms coming to us. It's another way of also ensuring that we're working with teams that we really have vetted through. We're working with initial ideas that we have a lot of understanding and knowledge about the IP process. And as a result, we don't operate like a venture capital firm where they contribute capital to those to ideas that already exist, whereas we come up with the initial ideas themselves.
Okay.
So you hire teams around the ideas, like you come up with an idea for golf balls or metamaterials, and then you say, who could put together the manufacturing, who could do the marketing? You grow a team around it?
Exactly. At that very early stage, where they still have input into the idea, because we might know, 80% about what you need to know about golf balls, but we need to go hire the top 5 people who understand the last 20% about golf balls to really make the idea hit the problem space that we've identified. And it's through that kind of serendipity where we bring in that CTO, bring in that CEO to drive that particular thing forward, where we don't have the expertise to bring it all the way home, but we have enough knowledge of the problem space to know that there's something there, and it's a matter of solving the last few technological problems and having an investable leadership.
Hello, this is Trent Fowler, co-host of the Futurati podcast. One of the most common pieces of marketing advice I've come across is to know your audience and give them what they want. One difficulty in podcasting is that it's actually pretty hard to do this. None of the major platforms give us any way to reach out to you, our listeners, to find out what you enjoy about the Futurati podcast and what you'd like to see done differently. So we've decided to record this commercial and ask you directly to reach out to us. Head over to futuratipodcast.com, go to the contact page, and drop us a line. Tell us about your favorite and least favorite episodes, what you'd like to see us cover in the future, and anything else you want us to know. We produce this show for you, and we want your advice so we can make it even better. Thank you.
Can you give us an example of one that has run through your operation and the things that you ran into?
Oh, man. Yeah. Let me see. Let's use Mangata Networks. So this is not from Microsoft. This is from my previous company, the Invention Science Fund. Mangata Networks is one of our metamaterials spin-outs. We came across an insight into the physical properties of materials that allowed us to spin out a number of companies at different bands of the IR wavelength spectrum that had the same fundamental breakthrough with regard to the material properties necessary to beamform in a really efficient way. So we could do things like beamform radio signals or beamform.
What is that? Beamform? What does that mean?
Yeah, form beams around. So let me use an example of a cell tower. If you versus like an FM radio. If you're driving down the road and you're getting an FM radio signal, the FM radio broadcasting station doesn't know that you're there and doesn't know to send a stronger signal to your antenna than it's sending everywhere else. It just broadcasts on a huge wide space. Utilizing beamforming technology, as a lot of cell towers do these days, they're able to realize that there is a device picking up the signal at the other end and focuses the signal that they're sending out in order to have communication between the devices receiving and their output. This improves the quality of the signal that you're getting dramatically. Now, as we know, just in the same way that cell signal and radio signals are on the same IR span, as is light, as is sound, if you understand the fundamental properties of the metamaterials underlying the technology, you're able to spin out companies that focus on light or LiDAR or radio signals or cell phone signals or basically anything in that spectrum. You're able to come up with a different application to modify and beamform those waves in specific applications.
So with Mangata, what shape was it in when it came to you? Was it somebody show up at your doorstep in the middle of the night holding a 6-pack of beer and saying, let's talk? Is that how?
No. So recall, right? We come up with these ideas ourselves.
Oh, so we ideated internally.
Yeah. And so we ran a big, what we call innovation session, where we brought people. We knew that it would be interesting to be able to have a kind of material that would be able to do different things as a result of being architected in a particular way, something that wasn't found in nature. So we looked at a bunch of various kinds of problem spaces where if we had a cool material that could do X, how would it be able to solve a money-making problem in a particular space? And we came up with, we had a bunch of scientists in the room, a bunch of artists, a bunch of business people, a bunch of attorneys, and we bandied about ideas for a number of days and weeks and series of weeks. Some of those we were able to take forward and say, hey, you know what? Our scientists in particular, right? Hey, you know what? If we did these sorts of things, if we, and this gets beyond my pay grade, we resonated these materials with a certain, in a certain sort of way, they would form these structures that would allow us to use a non-movable material to actually beamform and continue to beamform with something that is moving, by changing the way in which that material interacts with those waves themselves. Now,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and once that insight's had, right? Like it's the same with how we figured out, how Wilbur and Orville Wright figured out how to build a plane, right? Like, wait, we can do this on water. Water is just denser air. So how do we think about doing in air which responds in much the same way as water does, except it's a lighter sort of fluid. How do we do that? So, yeah, it was the same sort of thing for us, where we was like, okay, we solved it for radio waves. How do we figure it out for light? We solved it for light. How do we figure it out for sending telecommunications of different kinds? Yeah, and so Mangata Networks is that application of that metamaterials technology to satellites. Mangata Networks ends up being a competitor to companies like Starlink. Starlink has a really huge, satellite constellation that they're building around the globe in order to provide internet from space. Mangata Networks, because of its technological breakthrough in the material science itself, is able to position satellites much further out than Starlink is able to, which, of course, thinking about it geometrically, allows them to have a much smaller network of actual devices cover the same amount of area as Starlink does, which drops their OpEx right through the floor, making them a very solid competitor to something like Starlink. Of course, when we figured out Mangata Networks, Starlink wasn't even a thing at that point in time, but we knew, having a terrestrial network of satellites in order to provide internet would be super important and useful for the world. And one of those things that was pretty much guaranteed to produce a return once you're able to get that kind of material doing that kind of thing into that particular space.
So, in what form does the company exist today? Is it operational? Is it making money?
Yeah, it's Series B.
Okay.
Yep. And as part of their business model, and this is something we didn't anticipate when we spun them out, they also realized that they have a value add in building a companion terrestrial network.
Okay.
And so they're pursuing two different paths right now, both terrestrial and satellite, that are complementary to each other. They've raised several $100 million in venture capital. I can't remember what their Series B was. Their Series A just tipped over triple digits, as I recall. And they're continuing right along. Last I heard, they're because I'm a few years out from working with Invention Science Fund. They've signed a couple of agreements with a few governments around the world, to my understanding, including Singapore, and are taking this technology forward.
So, assuming they're worth $1 billion someday, can you talk about like what your cut of that would be? Not you personally, but I mean your company.
Yeah, for sure. So the way that waterfall goes down depends very much on the how the rounds of financing went after the Series A. Right, when they leave the fund, generally at the Series A stage, the fund will keep something between, as I mentioned before, 15 and 20%. But that's in one sort of way of keeping that kind of equity on the cap table. Another way in which you're able to keep equity on the cap table is through royalties around the intellectual property that was invented in order to maintain that particular application. So most of the companies that spun out of the Invention Science Fund had two different ways of ensuring the fund got paid back in some way. One was a place on the cap table, which would dilute over time. The other one was through an intellectual property agreement by which they had a license to utilize the intellectual property within that specific band for the application that they were utilizing.
Okay, that's remarkable. So I'm curious as to how you go through the idea generation process. So what's your information diet like? How do you find new ideas? I mean, because it sounds like honestly the coolest job I've ever heard of.
It's a blast. Yeah,
it's an amazing job. I didn't even know this was a thing people did. So what's that process look like?
Yeah. Oh man, this is my favorite thing to talk about. It varies depending on the goals that that you have or the organization that you're working with has. So I'm doing the same thing inside of Microsoft right now. It's very different from what I would do at the Invention Science Fund. If I worked at Amazon, if I worked at Google, if I worked at DARPA, it would be dramatically different in each of those organizations because this process requires a whole lot of cultural and executive buy-in. And each of those organizations has different goals that they're trying to meet for this. So I'm going to explain kind of a view of the process that abstracts away from those goals, despite the fact that they're necessary for the actual implementation, to the process itself. The process itself really takes, and this is probably my favorite part about it, really takes into account the way in which you and I come up with ideas and how we test whether those ideas are worthwhile or not. The first stage that we go into is coming up with the ideas themselves. Now, there's a lot of different ways of going about that. Sometimes you can, have a couple of beers on the back porch with your buddies and come up with what you think are a lot of great ideas. And that could be the case, but it becomes particularly more the case when all of you have kind of a common language around the problem space that you're attempting to solve. Say that, you're all building a house, and you've been building the house all day, and you've run into a couple of particular problems. You and your buddies on the back porch, you've all have the requisite knowledge and kind of understanding of the thing that you're roughly trying to go after, and the problems that have come up as you are trying to go after that thing. This makes your ideation, you're coming up with ideas on how to solve it, much richer than if you all were just random strangers coming together and given a particular problem. So the way that I run these idea generation sessions is that I bring all of the relevant material that the group of people who have come together to come up with an idea should have before they start coming up with the idea. Currently inside Microsoft, for example, I will get all of the market research that we have, all of the work that startups are doing in the particular problem space that we're trying to solve in. And all of the different perspectives from the different people in the group. So engineers, data scientists, product managers, designers, the different disciplines that will be represented in this idea generating session. And I'll give them all this material in order for them to absorb it, to really have that as a fermentation layer on which they're able to come up with good ideas, and ideas that end up being conversant with each other, and ideas that aren't.
But how do you find those? How do you find those? Like, so, I mean, even just that, by the time you get there, you've done a tremendous amount of work. Like, I'm not even sure I've got some ideas how I would start, but how do you select the materials? Like, you can't just go pull journals off a shelf. You must have some notion of the direction you're heading. So how does that start with you?
Yeah, a lot of research. And so we
read all day.
I spend a good amount of time reading, probably 2 hours a day, I'd say. And for sessions like this, I'll do a lot of very specific directed reading, hundreds, thousands of pages in order to prepare for a particular set of sessions, across a whole variety of different areas. And not only the technological, but also where the business models are going, what kinds of problems the people in the space are encountering. Everything you'd want to know to start out on a journey. Now, that's the ideal state, right? Sometimes the sessions are a week long, and I can't possibly have that much material absorbed by my group, and so you have to tone it down a bit. But that's the limit that you're hoping to approach, right?
So several years ago, I was working on a project called The Anatomy of a Startup, and trying to create a systematic approach to getting a startup off the ground. Do you use a systems approach for?
Very much so.
Okay.
Very much so. In fact, before we have any of those idea sessions, we build out an operational framework for figuring out how to launch something. Because if you don't have a way to launch whatever you've come up with, particularly inside the enterprise, then you've given a dead-end road to people who have contributed what they believe are their best and brightest things to your endeavor, right? You want to start by creating a bit of a pull motion so that the ideas have a place to go, a validation mechanism to go through, an iteration and a prototyping in order for that to happen. Yeah.
Okay.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Our anatomy of a startup had all the different paths that you go down. The intellectual property path, you have the legal path, you have the staffing path.
You absolutely need that, right? But you need it later on if you're starting out with the idea.
Right.
So that idea thing. So we come up with thousands of ideas, right? But then we have to get to the validation process, and the validation process necessarily requires the customer. If we don't have some sort of customer feedback, even if it's in a light sort of way, then we could be building a bridge to nowhere. And so we have those thousands of ideas. We don't do any ranking ourselves. We don't do any stacking ourselves. We take we bounce as much as we can immediately off of customers in very small sorts of feedback loops and experiments, so that the customers can tell us, oh yeah, I like the color of that, or actually the problem I had was this, and I don't see how the idea you have here solves that. But the key is fast iteration and incremental progress. So if it's going to take you a week to figure out a way of testing a particular idea, don't start with that one. Start with the ones where you're able to test in 15 minutes or 20 minutes by bouncing it off of somebody on LinkedIn, or, handing out flyers on the street. That allows you to take the idea, give it a little bit of validation outside of the group that came up with the idea, because we all love our darlings, and because it's hard for us to see the problem,
right.
From from the customer's perspective.
Right.
And at a certain point in time in that prototyping, that validation methodology space, you say, do you know what? It's worthwhile to start solving all the company problems around this. And that's exactly where your startup roadmap comes in, because, if you run into any problems along any of those veins, a great idea and some customer validation does not a business make. So.
Right.
Are you enjoying this episode of the Futurati podcast? If so, please like it, give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share it with your friends. By far, the best way to help us grow is to spread the word on social media, which will expose our content to more people and help us continue to bring you interviews with world-leading experts in AI, quantum computing, cryptocurrencies, and so much more. Thank you in advance.
What are some innovations? Are there any innovations you've seen in business plans or funding mechanisms or anything like that? That's sort of a hobby horse I like to look into periodically. It's like, how is it that these companies get formed and structured? And there's been OpenAI has been OpenAI has been in the news for their kind of like goofy and hard to reason about structure. So I'm just curious as to, like, on the funding side, the plumbing, all that. Has anything cool come through?
Yeah. Well, first off, I'm a huge fan of the LLC, just generally. I think that was a great innovation. What is it now? 10, 15 years ago, started becoming really popular. I think that's great. I mean, the S and C Corps, I think, are great innovations for particular kinds of business models. But the one that's actually been most on my mind, particularly in the last 6 to 12 months, as I've been working with startups, is revenue share ways of raising capital. I mean, I think I can strongly say this, that venture capital post the era of 0% interest rates is going to go through some fundamental changes in the next, already has in some ways, but is going to go through some more in the next couple of years. I anticipate that startups raising around a revenue share model are going to see a lot more success than going the traditional venture capital route that used to happen of, the running through your series and the CEO getting the Bentley at the Series B and that sort of thing. I don't think we're in that sort of monetary policy era anymore, and venture capital is going to have to refactor to really understand that, because they've been in that paradigm since 2008. That's one. Two, I think that actually is great news for founders because they're able to keep more of their cap table as a result of that. And also, they're going to be able to focus more on what they've always wanted to do, which is solving the customer problem, rather than adding in a bit of a different point of view in terms of where the company direction goes from the perspective of the venture capitalist. No, I mean, good venture capitalists always align their interests with solving the customer problem, but not everybody's a good venture capitalist out there. And in the end, the venture capitalist's incentive is around the spread of the portfolio, not necessarily the success of any particular venture within it. And as a result, they're in some ways have divided interest from the founder themselves. And the problem and the solution that the founder is trying to bring forward. So while this paradigm shift might be kind of a rough one for, a year or two or three, as founders kind of wrap their heads around that, and venture capital firms do too, I think in the end, it still ends up serving the interests of founders in a really deep and interesting way.
So yeah, it sounds like it gets rid of the principal agent problem by just routing around it all together and just sort of like completely removing the conditions under which it would arise.
Yep. Yeah, that's my theory at least. We'll see how it plays out.
That's really cool.
So what's the next hot technology that is catching your attention? So cyborgism?
So there's, I have to say AI at least once during every conversation, or else Microsoft will fire me. But I feel like in fact I just heard Satya talking about it today. I feel like if we take the challenge appropriately, that we're in the era of where we can make machines understand us rather than us have to understand machines. So that's a really broad brush to paint with, right? Right now, we're still pouring through our articles on prompt engineering and figuring out what this poking at the chat GPT thing and trying to make it do something other than make funny images or, poems in the style of Donald Trump or whatever. But I think it actually can be a modality of human thought, a true companion for us as we, bump about the world, using our mighty brains, which still are very mighty. But it's the kind of intelligence that we're not used to. It's one that's strange to us, and we don't really know how to incorporate it into the things that we do routinely as humans. And so it remains a sort of strange thing that we poke at and do funny things because we don't really understand its full capabilities or the way in which we should interact with it. But the way with the cost of compute dropping, the efficiency of models rising, I see in the next couple of years the machine being able to respond better to the way in which we think, rather than the way in which we think having to shift in order to respond to the machine.
Yeah.
You may recall, in fact, when Google came out with the search engine, I remember having to think differently in order to get the kind of answer that I wanted out of the Google search engine.
Right.
And it became more ubiquitous, and now I kind of think that way all the time, which is unfortunate, right? Because now I spend more time on my phone because I'll just come up with a question like, oh yeah, I know I could get an answer to this in minutes. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that shift because it'll enable us to come to better insights, to longitudinally become better people and pursue the things that we hold dear by working with a companion that we've asked to help us along that journey. Now, we made it, right? The humans made it, which means that we could also ask it to do terrible things and help us do terrible things along that journey. But at least the potential's there, as it is with any other tool.
Yeah. I ended up spending a lot of time talking about buddy bots, that you wake up first thing in the morning and you start talking back and forth with your buddy bot.
Yeah.
That in having great conversations with something that begins to understand who you are, what you're motivated by, what's of interest to you, all of the things that are become important in your life. And then it can help hold you accountable. It can encourage you. It can actually come up with new approaches to the problems that you're working on, and can actually start to coach you on, if you would have said this or done that, you would have gotten a better response, that sort of thing. And so that opens the door for lots of other types of bots that I think we'll be interacting with in the future.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that time.
Well, it gives lots of different artifacts or structures the ability to talk to you, like in the language. It gives it like an expressive interface, a way for you to query it back and forth. And so, I think you're going to see more people building like specialized applications around therapeutics with it, or performance enhancement, some of the things Thomas was talking about. I think you're going to see all those dynamics play out, but also, it trained on personal knowledge graphs, or trained on your web history, or you just interact with it a lot, and it kind of like salts it, it seasons it, and then it kind of learns you, and then it's a Spanish tutor or whatever. And like, it's interesting because I have a 6-year-old daughter who's super into it, right? She really likes talking to ChatGPT, and she'll ask if she can talk to the phone, and then I'll give it to her, and she'll run off and she'll say, I'm missing, my mom. Why is she not home? And the bot will kind of talk to her. But it's interesting because I feel like I'm getting a glimpse of what the next thing's going to be like. And I think the voice is the next platform people are onto something, because the other day she was playing around with my computer, my just desktop computer. And she said, can I talk to this? After like 2 minutes, she was like, can I talk to this? Will it understand me? It's a very natural way for her to interact with it. And it gives rise to these like interesting situations. Like the other day she was talking to it, and I was trying to wrap it up, right? I kept telling her it's time to go to bed. It's time to go to bed. And she wouldn't listen to me. So finally I raised my voice a little bit. I was like, it's time to go to bed. And ChatGPT interrupts, and it goes, okay, it sounds like it's time for bed. I'll always be here to talk to you. But like, it inserted itself right into the interaction in a totally seamless and perfect way. And I was like, these are new primitives. Something really interesting is happening with this.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. Particularly as we get better at shaping the context in which it's operating, right?
Right.
Like
fine tuning, or retrieval augmented generation, all of that.
Exactly. Or even exactly. Yeah. And telling the bot like, hey, every time you interact with this person here, know that it's my 6-year-old child, and here's the things that I think it would be great if that she should learn, or end by 8 p.m. or all of those sorts of things that are very simple for it to operate on, but provide so much reassurance and like context for the way in which we want to work with another intelligence.
So how long before we no longer need to read and write, that we can talk back and forth to these things, and it knows what we're working on? And I have a friend who claims that by 2050, literacy will be dead. I'm wondering if that's actual thing that's actually possible.
So I totally understand where the thought comes from, and I think it depends on what we decide to do with it, right? Well, when writing came out in ancient Greece and ancient Mesopotamia, there were documented accounts of folks saying this will destroy our ability to memorize, and they weren't wrong, right? There's accounts of ancient Greeks being able to walk from Athens to Sparta, with a different person, spending time with them every hour of the trip. And then they would be able to recite back the stories that that person said in reverse order when they walked on the way back. A feat of memory that, few of us would be able to do. But when you don't have the written word, then you develop that. So it's the same sort of thing, I think, with how we utilize this technology. We can hand over to it the key features of our rationality and the key features of our intelligence, that we, if we want to, they like, will it be able to text my wife and my kids and mostly, cover 80-90% of the job that I do, ensuring that, they have corn dogs for dinner, or that, that Mia gets to tap on time, or, XYZ. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt about it. Will they be able to, will it be able to operate in the moment, with all of the context that I have and kind of the human connection that we have together? Or will I, with the knowledge that it's able to give me, like, hey, you know what, the last interaction you had with your daughter Mia, given what we know about her, in this future state, when it has a whole lot more context about my family and the different things which we're operating in, where each of us is at in a, a psychological and neurological format. Maybe you could try this technique from, dialectical behavioral therapy, and this might have, like, enrich your understanding of your daughter and your interactions with her. But that's the state that I think that we should, as humans, kind of challenge ourselves to pursue, which is, don't give the things that we find enjoyable and useful and enriching over to the machines completely, or else we'll find ourselves on a treadmill inside our house, watching a movie instead of, running around the park with our dog and our kid in the stroller.
Yeah, you want to maintain contact with the world in your life. You like, even as it becomes easier and easier to outsource a lot of those things. Some of those things are just what worth doing, because that's what good lives are made out of, is moments like that. That's part of just the tapestry of it all, right? And they just have to be lived.
Exactly.
That's what they are, right? And you wouldn't want to outsource it. But I completely agree. I think there's a lot.
It's our choice, though.
Yeah, and I think there's lots of potential to use it in humanizing ways, like ways that make us more creative or more expressive. And I know a former podcast guest here with us, Gina Gorlin, has put together a course that exploits, I think it's ChatGPT or one of these models, through prompt engineering to make it into a therapist. So she's a psychologist, and it's all about, like, unearthing deeper insights into how you operate and what you value and how to get more out of your life. And I was like, that's great. Like, it's a really, really good use case of that technology, scaling that out.
Do you need a dynamic and knowledgeable speaker for an event? Thomas Fry and me, Trent Fowler, are both seasoned keynote speakers, able to converse on a wide array of topics to audiences of all sizes and skill levels. Go to the contact page at futuraudiopodcast.com to book Thomas or myself today, and let us apply our years of experience in public speaking to make your event a smashing success.
Yeah. In particular, like, and literacy, I think, is interesting too, because like, reading and writing ends up being a way of living inside of other people's heads and meeting people across time that I don't think we'll be able to replace in definitive ways. In many ways, right, writing ends up being a way of thinking, where you don't necessarily have the solution or the insight that you think you do until you've actually written out an explanation of what you're trying to do. I think there's an anecdote from Einstein that said that he understood the theory of relativity 2 weeks before he was able to write it down, because there's kind of a secondary insight of expression that comes through the way that we as humans simply operate. And so I don't think any of those things are going away. I think that we have another intelligence on which to inscribe them.
Yeah, it's like you're sculpting yourself internally when you read and write in a way. It's like there's something unique about that way of processing the information that's especially powerful. And no, I think even with advanced AI, like I take a lot of notes by hand. I still do. I see a lot of other people doing it as well. It's very popular. Like, it's making a resurgence in some places, even like cursive handwriting and stuff like that.
Never left. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a Zettelkasten thing I'm building over there. Yeah, so I think that there's something special about that. And books too, there's something about that experience that I think a lot of people really like. And I have a hard time imagining it's going to go away by 2050. The day could come when the voice interface is so good that it is kind of superfluous. It's just literally always hovering and ready to talk to you, or project images onto your retina or something like that. If it's just like, an extended mind, then maybe there's not much point, but I suspect we're ways away from that.
Well, and it's not fast enough. I can read like 500-600 words a minute, and I can't listen that fast. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. So what's next for you, Taylor? Are you planning on being the next CEO of Microsoft?
No, not at all. Not at all. See, because it's all about growth then, right? I'm a 0 to 1 guy. Like, give me back in the trenches, coach, back in the trenches. So,
yeah. Okay.
yeah, no. Yeah, no, I mean, I love Microsoft. I'll definitely be here another few years, knock on wood. But yeah, after this, I plan on leaving to join a venture studio in the deep tech space. I really think that all of our software breakthroughs over the last couple of decades have been phenomenal, but what in particular AI in the last year or two is showing me is that we're going to have fundamental breakthroughs in some of the core scientific problems and material science problems and deep tech sort of problems that I think we're going to need to build on. And so I'm really looking forward in particular to getting into the space between hardware and interfacing with human biology.
All right. You might want to listen to our episode 102 where we get
awesome. Yeah.
We get into designer babies and the guy that's actually working on the genetic engineering that'll take us there.
Interesting. Yeah.
What's his name?
HSU or Sue or so.
Dr. Shu. Yeah, Steve Shu. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a really good episode. Yeah, and also the one with a couple episodes back with the guy that did all the like quantitative analyses on blood and blood markers, and they claim that they can basically detect all kinds of different diseases like decades in advance. Like the markers are all there. It's just they're very subtle, and they developed this like really powerful technique for detecting it all. And it's not
that's fascinating.
It's not like Elizabeth Holmes. It's totally different.
Yeah.
I asked him.
But is it like Gattaca? Did you ask that?
Oh, that movie was just before I started watching science fiction, so I've never actually seen it. I'm familiar with it, but I haven't actually seen it.
You should watch it. You should watch it. Then you can start growing a beard like mine.
Is that right? Oh, is that what it's gonna take to finally push me over the edge and become?
Yeah, it'll do it. It'll do it.
Yeah, special combs and stuff for it.
No, actually, I just use a detangler brush in the shower. Works out great.
Just Rasputin. Excellent. Well, I was gonna say you look like Roman Yampolsky. He's another guy we interviewed on AI safety.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I feel like I bet that fellow.
He gets around. Yeah, you'd probably recognize him if you saw him. He's got a very Rasputin beard. Do you have any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
I don't think that we as humans really can make a technology that we can't misuse, and that we're at our best when we remain human while utilizing our technology. That's the thing that's always kind of spurred us forward, kind of keeping that spark alive and really building the bonds between each other as a human community. And that's the reason why we develop technology, not the other way around. So, yeah, hold on to that.
Well, that's magnificent. Thanks so much. This was very enlightening. We really appreciate your time and good luck in future ventures.
Thank you. Appreciate it, gentlemen. Have a good one.
Thanks, Taylor.